Learning is learning, right? Passive learning. What does that mean? Active learning. What is that? I think we can assume that they're different, but how? And do we learn more from one than the other? I think we can find out the answers to these questions by looking at some learning activities you may have had some experience with. Of all the learning activities you're familiar with, reading is probably the most common. Textbook, trade journals, and currently you have e-zines, e-books, e-news, which are accessible on various electronic devices. Information also can be heard on podcasts or in the classroom during lectures. Looking at pictures or graphics is another way to learn. Are you recognizing any of these activities so far? If not, I'll bet you've watched movies or videos to learn something. I'll just mention YouTube here as a little hint. Possibly you've watched a demonstration or you've looked at an exhibit in a museum in order to learn about a topic. Would it surprise you that these learning activities are all passive learning instructional methods? Passive learning is the acquisition of knowledge without active effort. In passive learning, students are not engaged. They are receiving information by reading, hearing, seeing, or by a combination of hearing and seeing. That explains it a little more, doesn't it? Well, I have a few more learning activities for you to consider. Discussion groups are being used quite a bit in classrooms and online learning scenarios. Presenting a talk on a topic helps you to learn, since you have to research the topic and write the script for the talk, and then you have to actually give the talk, so you're saying and writing. Planning and presenting a dramatization on a specific topic also facilitates learning, as well as simulating a real experience, such as drawing the flow of an experiment or actually doing the experiment. Now, it probably doesn't surprise you that these activities are active learning methods of instruction. Active learning is a process where students learn through activities such as reading, writing, discussion, or problem solving. In active learning, students are engaged in doing things, and they're thinking about the things they're doing. So now we know what both passive and active learning are and how they're different. But we don't know if we learn more from one type of learning than from the other. So maybe we need to look at what learning is. Learning is a change in knowledge. That change is caused by an instructional episode, and the change is in what we know. Makes sense, right? Okay, stay with me. The change in what we know has to start with how much new information we remember. Or in other words, how much of the new information are we retaining? If we retain more, then that would make the change in knowledge more. Therefore, better retention equals better learning. Let's take a look at those passive learning examples from earlier to see how they affect retention. So here are our passive learning examples from earlier. Let's consider them. When presented with new information, learners generally remember or retain 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, and 50% of what they see and hear. Now, retaining 50% of new information, that's quite a bit of information, but is it enough of change in knowledge to make for better learning? Maybe active learning instructional methods will result in better retention. Let's take a look at our earlier examples. When presented with new information, learners generally remember or retain 70% of what they say and write, 90% of what they say and do. So I think it's pretty clear that active learning instructional methods definitely result in better retention of new information. Remember, better retention equals better learning. Okay, so we just looked at retaining information and how that changes what we know. Remember, learning is a change in knowledge. So learning equals change. Once we retain that information, what can we do with it? For example, can we define it, practice it, or analyze it? What we can do with retained information is called a learning outcome. The more we can do with the information, the deeper the learning. The better the outcome, the deeper the learning. In other words, the more we can do with the information, the better is the better outcome, and the better the outcome, the deeper the learning. Let's go back and look at those examples of passive and active learning activities one more time and see how they affect learning outcomes. So here are our passive learning methods from earlier, and we're going to look at them as they affect learning outcomes. When we learn through activities that involve reading or hearing words, we are usually able to describe, define, list, and/or explain the information that we have retained. This is considered shallow learning, memorizing without trying to think about the underlying significance. When we learn through activities that involve seeing pictures or seeing pictures and hearing words combined, we are usually able to demonstrate, apply, and/or practice with the retained information. This is considered a moderate level of learning. More comprehension of information beyond just memorization. Now let's look at the active learning activities from earlier. When we learn through activities that we say and write the information, or we say and do something with the information, we are able to analyze, create, and evaluate with that information. This is considered to be deeper learning. We've gone beyond memorizing facts. We can comprehend and apply higher order thinking skills with the retained information. I think that this shows active learning instructional methods achieve the deepest learning outcomes. Okay, so now let's recap. We now know what passive and active learning instructional methods are. We know how they are different, and we also know how they contribute to learning, both retention and outcomes. Our last question was, do we learn more from one than the other? I think we know the answer, but wouldn't it be great to see it all together? Let's do it. We're going to start with passive learning methods. In passive learning, students are not engaged. They are receiving information by reading, hearing, seeing, or by a combination of hearing and seeing. In active learning, students are engaged in saying, writing, and doing things, as well as thinking about the things that they are doing. When presented with new information, learners generally remember or retain 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, 50% of what they see and hear, 70% of what they say and write, and 90% of what they say and do. When we learn through activities that involve reading or hearing words, we are usually able to achieve shallow learning. When we learn through activities that involve pictures or seeing pictures and hearing words combined, we are usually able to achieve a moderate level of learning. When we learn through activities that we say and write the information, or say and do something with the information, we are able to achieve deeper learning. Isn't it great to see it all together? I think it's pretty clear. Active learning equals better retention as well as deeper learning outcomes, which results in better learning overall. Without a doubt, I think we can say that we learn better from active, engaged learning instructional methods. Don't you think your students will too?